She's one of the few people, really pass through every belt, in the jiu-jitsu. She won the world, Abu Dhabi, and the ADCC. She's born, with some kind of, gift. She's grew up, in the mat.
Like, always wanted to be like my dad. Like, man, that's like a champion. Like, I want to be that too,
People ask, oh man, who's that girl? It's Megaton's daughter, all that kind of stuff. It's funny because 2 days ago in the tournament, the people, hey, who's that guy? Oh, it's Mackenzie's father. I said, man, how the things change.
Now I'm like the new queen of Abu Dhabi,
For years, the joke inside MMA gyms was that Mackenzie Dern won every fight in the wrong sport. Take her jiu-jitsu belt off, put her in a cage, and something didn't translate. Definitely not her skill, but her scoring. She'd control fights in ways only a jiu-jitsu black belt can see, and still watch her hand not get raised. On August 15, 2026, inside Philadelphia's Xfinity Mobile Arena, she walked out as the UFC strawweight champion, defending a belt she'd spent nearly a decade learning how to actually win. The question worth asking isn't whether Mackenzie Dern is a great grappler. That's obvious. Everybody already knows that. The question is, what had to break in her before the judges started agreeing?
Like, jiu-jitsu is made, for like the small person to defend themselves or to be able to beat a big person, But if you make one mistake, then that's it, So I play my game. I know, like, I have like great jiu-jitsu, Like, I have the jiu-jitsu to beat anyone.
Mackenzie Dern is one of the grapplers with the most credentials to ever sign a UFC contract. She was a world champion multiple times, a black belt before she turned 20. She was raised on the mat of her father's academy in Arizona. None of that is in dispute. What was in dispute for most of her UFC career was whether that background would ever be enough. Dern spent years being simultaneously overhyped and underestimated. Expected to run through the division on jiu-jitsu alone, then picked apart for the very gaps that expectations ignored. Her title defense at UFC 330 against Gillian Robertson closed a specific chapter of that argument. It wasn't Dern's most spectacular performance. It didn't need to be. What this fight showed is that Dern is a fighter who has learned the hard way what it actually takes to win rounds. In a sport her jiu-jitsu instincts didn't fully prepare her for. This is the story of how she got there and what it cost her to change. Dern's background reads like a script itself. She was on the mats at 3 years old, training under her father, Wellington Diaz, aka Megaton, a respected black belt who built his own academy in Phoenix, Arizona. By her teens, she was already competing in adult divisions, regularly matched against bigger, more experienced opponents and crushing them. She earned her black belt in 2012, still a teenager by the sport's usual timeline, and went on to collect world titles against gi and no-gi competitions. When she made the jump to MMA in 2016, she wasn't just another grappler with a UFC dream. She was arguably the most accomplished pure jiu-jitsu competitor to ever attempt to transition. That resume created a problem nobody could have imagined. Dern entered the UFC in 2018 with expectations built entirely around the skill set that doesn't score the same way inside a cage. In jiu-jitsu, a competitor knows exactly how close a choke is to landing, and how close an arm is to breaking, because they can feel it. Judges scoring an MMA fight can't feel any of that. They score on what they see: strikes landing, cage control, visible damage. For years, Dern kept winning fights the way a jiu-jitsu competitor wins them: dominant position, constant pressure, submission attempts that looked threatening to anyone who understood grappling, and looked far less aggressive to 3 judges who didn't. The gap between those two realities came into focus in October 2022, when Dern dropped the majority decision to Yan Xiaonan. She nearly finished the fight with a late submission attempt, and by her own account, she felt like she'd won it. 1 judge scored it a draw, 2 gave it to Xiaonan. Since that fight, Dern called that loss the most important lesson of her career, not because of what happened in the cage, but because of what it forced her to understand afterwards. she had been fighting with what she describes as a jiu-jitsu mindset in a sport that runs on a completely different criteria. A grappler in that position knows exactly how close an opponent is to tapping, how much danger they're really in, but a judge sitting cage side has no access to that feeling. They score what's visible. A dominant position isn't a finisher to a judge the way it feels to a grappler. Visible danger is. That distinction, once she absorbed it, changed how she approached every fight that followed. It became less about proving control to herself, more about making that control impossible for a judge to miss. The lesson didn't arrive all at once, and it didn't make the next stretch of her career easy. In November 2023 at UFC 295, Jéssica Andrade exposed the gaps in Dern's striking defense and showed that this is what was missing in her fight game. That night was another lesson that Dern needed to learn. 3 months later, at UFC 298, Amanda Lemos dominated her over 3 rounds in a fight many considered a genuine fight of the night type of battle. Back-to-back losses, the first time that happened in Dern's career. These losses started to raise the question, was Dern out of her league? Has she reached her ceiling? Maybe she should just stick with jiu-jitsu. Dern even admitted that there were moments in that stretch when she thought seriously about walking away from MMA altogether and going back to the sport where winning was simpler, where she was used to winning everything. What happened next is the part of the story that actually explains UFC 330. Dern didn't retreat into her jiu-jitsu comfort zone. She kept building the rest of her game under striking coach Jason Perillo, layering boxing fundamentals and fight IQ on top of the grappling game that had already been there. In August 2024, she beat Lupi Godinez by decision. In January 2025, she finished Amanda Ribas with a 3rd round armbar, showing that her submission game was still a real threat. Then came UFC 321 in October 2025, a rematch with Virna Jandiroba for the vacant strawweight title. It wasn't a grappling clinic, it was a 5-round striking battle, close enough that Dern needed her jab and her improved boxing more than her jiu-jitsu to get recognized. She won by unanimous decision and became UFC champion for the first time. She admitted after the fight that it had not gone the way she expected and had been much harder than she had imagined. 10 months later, Robertson was waiting. The Canadian arrived in Philadelphia on a 5-fight winning streak of her own, with the recent wins over Marina Rodriguez and Amanda Lemos. And let's keep in mind, Lemos had beaten Dern 2 years earlier. It was a legitimate threat, not a showcase opponent, and it was framed as exactly what it was, a battle between 2 of the division's best grapplers. Prior to that fight, the hype was real. Dern spent it openly, stating she was on a different level than her challenger. Inside the cage, she backed it up early. She hurt Robinson on the feet in the opening round, then nearly finished her with a rear naked choke that was saved by the bell. She kept that pattern going in round 2, hunting for the finish rather than settling for position. Through 4 rounds, there wasn't much argument about who was the better fighter. The 5th round told a more complicated story. Dern, visibly tired, and Robertson, who had spent most of the fight defending rather than attacking, found her only real success late, making Dern backpedal for the first time all night. Dern won the fight comfortably on the scorecards, 49-46 twice and 48-47, and afterwards admitted the finish had been the goal from the start. She also admitted that her legs started to give out during those last championship rounds. It's a small thing inside a lopsided win, but it's not nothing. UFC broadcast analysts pointed to that final round as a blueprint any future challenger would study. Evidence that even a title defense, this one-sided, still left a physical crack in Dern's game. That crack matters because of who's circling the division. Zhang Weili, the fighter Dern never actually had to beat to win the belt, is still nearby after her own move to flyweight didn't produce a second title. Dern has already acknowledged a fight with Zhang feels close to inevitable, and it's easy to see why the matchup appeals to both sides. This fight could be the closest thing strawweight has to a defining, unify the era type fight. Whether Dern gets there as a fighter who has fully closed the gap the old critics used to point to, or as a champion still working through limitations, is the question UFC 330 did not fully answer. What UFC 330 actually proved is narrower than the highlight reel suggests. It didn't prove Mackenzie Dern has become unbeatable, and it didn't erase every crack in her game. What it proved is that the fighter who once won rounds only a grappler could appreciate has learned to win in a way that the judges are actually looking for, and that the version of her built to survive 5 rounds is still being finished in real time. She spent years being told her limitation was jiu-jitsu. Somewhere between a majority decision loss in 2022 and a title defense in Philadelphia, she stopped trying to prove that wrong and started fighting like it never mattered in the first place.